I think a lot of the time, we do make jokes like, the aunties when you're getting your eyebrows threaded are like, do you want me to do your chin too? Like, and then that kind of like makes you think about, oh, well, I didn't think about that, right? But they are, again, trying to help you. And I tried to think from their point of view. A lot of these women are immigrants, right? Like they came to a new land with a new language, with a new culture, and everything was so different, right? They were doing life on like the hardest mode possible. And obviously they would do anything in their power to make that experience a little bit easier for them. And that would include, fitting in, particularly from an aesthetic angle, that would probably be the easiest thing they could do, right? And then, when you have kids, when you're here and the kids grow up here and they don't necessarily have to go through exactly the same things that you did, you still carry that trauma, right? And you don't want your kids to go through that. And although your kids might be having it a little bit easier because they know the culture, they know the language, they have the space in their mind to be able to challenge the things that you didn't, because you were spending all your energy on survival, right? Of trying to make it in this new, strange place. But your kids, like, this is the better life that you gave them. You gave them the ability to challenge those notions that you never were able to because you were preoccupied with all these other things. And I think that's a divide that you see quite frequently, not only in terms of body hair, but, in terms of, careers and in terms of all sorts of things.
Welcome back to Characters Like Us, a podcast where we explore the real world through diverse and inclusive storytelling in the books that we read and write. I'm Anvita.
And I'm Gitanshi.
You guys, a quick visual description. I'm a South Asian woman in her mid-20s. I have shoulder-length black hair, and I'm wearing a blue vest. And in my background is a bed, and on my right side is a brown cupboard.
And I am also a South Asian woman in her mid-20s. I have long black hair. In my background, you can see a gray-colored couch and a white bookshelf.
Today's episode is going to be so exciting. We are so excited to introduce to you today's episode's guest, one of our favorite authors, Jesmeen Kaur Deo. Jesmeen Kaur Deo grew up in northern British Columbia, Canada, where she spent most of her childhood daydreaming. When not wrapped up in stories, she can be found biking, playing the harmonium, or struggling to open jars. Her debut YA novel, TJ Powar Has Something to Prove, garnered international recognition. It was shortlisted for the German Youth Literature Prize, as well as for the Amy Mathers Teen Book Award in Canada, and was the Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection and Indie Next Pick, among other honors. Her second novel, Reasons We Break, comes out from Disney Hyperion on November 4th. Welcome, Jesmeen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, we have a new opening segment for the podcast. It's called Numbered Narratives. So basically, this is where you will pick a number between 1 and 34, and we'll ask you a fun bookish question that corresponds to that number. So, Jesmeen, which number between 1 and 34 would you pick?
Oh my God, why am I nervous?
It's just a fun, like, bookish question. Like,
okay,
no pressure.
Okay, 12.
12. Okay. What's your reading routine like? When and where do you read?
I think, well, obviously it does depend a little bit on convenience's sake, but my ideal reading is on my couch when it's afternoon and it's sunny. So then the sun is like streaming onto the couch and I can feel like a cat that's just stretching over this sunny part of my couch, and then just reading on like a nice quiet afternoon with the window open and the birds chirping. That's the ideal reading environment for me. It doesn't happen as often as I would like, but that is the ideal.
I love that. Yeah.
That sounds so lovely. And like the birds chirping in the background.
Yeah. I can't really read. Yeah, exactly. I can't read with music on, but like a little background noise is like needed, like just a little bit.
I don't really. I can totally read with music on. It's like, I think this is like a hot take, but the music can have words and I can read like totally fine.
Let's get started. I first want to know how did you get into writing? How did it start? Did you have like an initial spark that led you to want to write books? Like, what was it like, the process?
I don't feel like I'm very original. Like I was definitely one of those people who wanted to be a writer since I was little. I think part of it was my mom was always dragging me to the library. I don't know if she was like afraid I would be illiterate, but like she would like force me to read affectionately, like force me to read. And like, you know, I would constantly be making trips to the library and reading books and developing my taste that way. And when I started to develop an interest in writing, it was more so in actually poetry and in short fiction. And I remember this is like a long time ago now. My dad gifted me this USB, which at the time, you know, was, keep in mind I was like 8 or 9 years old. This is a long time ago. But at the time, USBs were like, you know, they were like a rare real estate. And he was like, wherever we go, like you can write and then you can put your stories on this. And so that was like, it was very sweet that, you know, both my parents were encouraging in different ways. And so that's sort of how I started to develop that interest. And then going into my teens, I kind of wrote a little bit more short stories, but I was also just kind of focused on living life, and it became a little bit on the back burner, particularly because I always saw myself, especially as I was growing older, more of a novelist rather than a poet or a short fiction writer. But I didn't have the attention span to write full novels. Like I would just abandon projects. So I sort of like put it on the back burner for a while. And then in my late teens, I started getting into TV, which wasn't something I had really been into before. I was always a reader. But once I got into TV, I also got into fandom. And then through fandom, I got into fan fiction. And I became a fan fiction writer, and I ended up writing a lot of novel length works. And I feel very lucky that I had a very supportive fan fiction community, people always encouraging me to like, you know, go and write my own original books. And that was what kind of gave me the courage to try again, because I said, well, clearly I have the attention span for it. I have done it. So let's see if I can apply that to my original works. So at that point, I started to try my hand at novel writing again. And this was a time when we're talking like the late 2010s, a time when there was starting to be a little bit more fiction written by marginalized communities. So I remember like Nisha Sharma, I think her first book came out around that time. And of course, you know, when Dimple met Rishi. And it really is so powerful. Like, I think it's really, really hard to describe the feeling to somebody who's always seen themselves in fiction. Because even myself, like I don't think I really realized the impact of it until much later, that when I saw other people writing these stories and saw them on screens, it became so much more possible for me. It became so obvious. Like up until that point, everything I had written had been like white people, because that was the default. And like now in retrospect, I'm like, wow, that's like batshit. Like why was I writing about white people when there was like such a rich experience that I was living and people around me were living that would make for such interesting stories. So that was sort of how I got into the writing part. And my first novel, it ended up getting me my agent, but it didn't sell. So then I went around and started writing TJ Powar.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I relate to what you said so much. When Dimple Met Rishi was actually my very first South Asian representation that I read. Mm-hmm. And I like very distinctly remember I was in the Barnes & Noble cafe and I was in the middle of it. And suddenly just like tears started like streaming down my face. And I don't know, I felt like suddenly like my experience was allowed to exist, because I'd been such a huge reader and writer my whole life. And I did exactly what you did. This is like, I don't know, such an interesting experience where you also start writing white characters, because that's just like what you think is like the only thing that's allowed to exist. And it's like subconscious. And then for me, it was like, and this, I was in like my freshman year of college at this point when I was reading this book. And I was like, oh my God, I've never read like somebody like me. And like it just like, I don't know, I was like, I am allowed to exist now because I am also this Indian American girl who is having these same thoughts and feelings as the, you know, the other main characters that I have read. And, you know, it was just so special. And thank you for highlighting that like in your story and in your writing journey. And it's also, you know, amazing that your parents supported you in those ways. I was like laughing at, you know, about the USB. It's like so hard to imagine now.
Yeah.
Have your parents continued to be a big support for you along this journey?
Oh yeah, like especially my dad. When TJ Powar was coming out, before it came out, he would like go to bookstores in our hometown and be like, "Oh, I heard of this author who has this book." Like, he wouldn't like say he's my dad. He would just like, "I heard of this book. Do you guys have it?" And then they wouldn't have it because it hadn't come out yet. And I don't even know if it was up for pre-order at that point. But he'd be like, maybe you should look into that. And so he would like go to bookstores and like get people to
Aw.
like get the booksellers to like look into the book. So he still does that, and he like sent the book to like so many of his own friends, and like we're talking like old Desi not old, but like older Desi uncles, and he would like get them to read the book. And I didn't think too much of it, but I was very surprised that like a lot of his friends actually really liked it. And like
Wow.
one of them like to this day is always asking my dad like, when's her next book coming out. So he's been very
Gosh.
supportive, and he's always in my corner. He was my first reader, really, when I was writing the short fiction and the objectively not that great poetry. When I was younger, he would always be reading it and supporting me. And I remember writing this like really like angsty short story. I don't know what was wrong with me, what was going on at the time, but like it was like super angsty, and he like read it and he like started crying, and he was like, the emotion is really there. And that was the first time I realized that like I could impact the emotions of other people, because I was so surprised to see it. Anyway, that's like a little bit of a digression from the point. But yes, he's still very supportive, and my mom too is quite supportive. But he's definitely the one who's leading the charge.
I
Oh,
love
that's
that.
so lovely. I feel like you often hear of like stories of especially like, Asian immigrant parents like not being as supportive of like artistic endeavors of their children. But what do you feel like has like made that experience different from you? Are your parents also artists?
It's hard because they also definitely have that side of they're immigrants, and they want me to also have like a stable career. And so I was always doing like dual things at once. So I think that made it easier for them to support, because I always also had other things going on in the background.
Uh-huh.
I'm not like a full-time writer, but and they're not artists like at all. My mom like doesn't read, and my dad definitely doesn't read anything like even remotely like this. But I think they at least understand the value of it. I think it's hard. It's hard. It's a really good question, because I don't really know why. I think they're also fairly like highly educated, and so they understand the importance of these kinds of topics, like the things that I'm writing about, and they understand the sort of power of like the written word to change things, right? Because they're both kind of like fairly educated in their own right, and I think that does help them a little bit. But honestly, I think a lot of it is also just love for me, because like honestly, they don't get like a lot of what I'm writing, but they're always there supporting it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So speaking of the topics that you are writing about, so TJ Powar, as we've discussed earlier, has some really powerful messages surrounding body hair stigma in South Asian communities. And I was actually really impressed with how you also brought an intersectional lens to that. And just like in general, there are some other really powerful messages in there. I was wondering, are you comfortable talking about what has your personal experience with body hair stigma been, and how did it influence you to write about this topic?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like almost, if not every, like brown girl can probably relate to this, but it was a very, very, significant thing growing up, this body hair stigma thing. But it was very rarely talked about. It was often subconscious, or it would be like the women in your life who are trying to like impose this upon you, not for any nefarious reason, but because they don't want you to go through the negative impacts of stigma and what it holds. I think for myself and my own personal experiences, I think it was more as an observer that I sort of witnessed a lot of these come to life. I remember seeing, like, I don't feel like I wasn't like the hairiest girl in my school. And I remember there was this one girl who would like, she had like very long arm hair, and people would call her like gorilla arms behind her back. And there was another girl I remember who went to a different school, but people would always comment on her unibrow. And there's also a scene in the book in TJ Powar where one of TJ's friends. Chandani relates this experience she had when she was with one of their white friends, Piper, and then another brown girl. And Piper was kind of making fun of the other girl's hair. And Chandani just didn't say anything because she was thinking to herself, if you knew this about me, you would make fun of me too. And I think that was actually like pretty much transcribed from my life. I was Chandani in that situation. And I feel like I've always been the Chandani in this situation because I always feel like it was never directed specifically at me, but I always felt it like it was. And I felt the fear of, if you knew this about me, you would make fun of me too. And I think it was that sort of stigma that I've carried throughout my life. And that feeling of injustice, every time I would, read a book or watch a movie where it's like a dystopian setting, but everybody magically doesn't have body hair. Or, like in a TV show again, or a book where if anyone ever mentions hair on a woman, it's to make fun of her or to make a joke out of her. And it was never treated as a serious topic. People who had that kind of hair were never treated seriously. It was always a joke or something negative. And I think the first time I read it more clearly was actually in the Hunger Games, because if you recall in the Hunger Games, Katniss, when she is brought to the Capitol, she gets waxed. And it's really powerful because the way she describes it, it's a negative experience for her. She doesn't like it. She doesn't like the fact that her hair is being taken away from her. And that it's such a small passage of that book, but it made such a deep impact on me because I had never seen it portrayed that way before, as body hair, something that she wanted to keep, that was a part of her, and that was being taken away, and that was a negative thing. And so I think it was really all these kinds of influences growing up that I really had never unpacked, that eventually, I don't know exactly how the idea even came to me. It was kind of like a lightning moment of, why don't I write a book about this and really delve into it? And I hope that answers your question. I feel like I went all over the place with that.
No, that was perfect.
I really just related so much. Even reading your book, I felt like this is not something that has ever been exactly directed towards me. And something that I really appreciated was you really approached the issue of, and you mentioned how like it's discussed within South Asian communities and it's not ever nefarious. And I really felt that because it's always something like, I remember the first time I had ever been asked about it was, my freshman year of college. And it was the other South Asian girl who lived in my dorm who was like, oh, it's brave of you to, not get your eyebrows threaded. And I had actually never thought about before. And I really credit my mom with that. Because she had always kind of brought it up as, oh, do you want to go with me? And I was like, and then I was always like, does it hurt? And she was like, yeah, it does. And I was like, well, no, I'm good.
Yeah, totally.
And I remember like feeling this betrayal. Is that something that was going through your head as you were writing the book, that you were really trying to like explore the complexities within these issues and like where this body hair stigma was coming from, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was important to portray both her peers, sort of pressuring her to do it, and also her elders. So from a peer angle, it's Chandani. And it was really important, again, for me to portray because often it is the other brown girls in your life who will notice it first. And it's probably because they also feel so intimately tied to the idea, and they care for you, right? And they know very well the experience of the body hair stigma. So it was really important to me that one of TJ's biggest ops was actually like her best friend who went through something very similar to her. And when it came from the aspect of when it came to the parental angle, that was also important for me to portray because I think a lot of the time, we do make jokes like, the aunties when you're getting your eyebrows threaded are like, do you want me to do your chin too? Like, and then that kind of like makes you think about, oh, well, I didn't think about that, right? But they are, again, trying to help you. And I tried to think from their point of view. A lot of these women are immigrants, right? Like they came to a new land with a new language, with a new culture, and everything was so different, right? They were doing life on like the hardest mode possible. And obviously they would do anything in their power to make that experience a little bit easier for them. And that would include, fitting in, particularly from an aesthetic angle, that would probably be the easiest thing they could do, right? And then, when you have kids, when you're here and the kids grow up here and they don't necessarily have to go through exactly the same things that you did, you still carry that trauma, right? And you don't want your kids to go through that. And although your kids might be having it a little bit easier because they know the culture, they know the language, they have the space in their mind to be able to challenge the things that you didn't, because you were spending all your energy on survival, right? Of trying to make it in this new strange place. But your kids, like, this is the better life that you gave them. You gave them the ability to challenge those notions that you never were able to because you were preoccupied with all these other things. And I think that's a divide that you see quite frequently, not only in terms of body hair, but, in terms of, careers and in terms of all sorts of things when it comes to the divide between first gen and second generation immigrant. But I think it's hard for the first gens to be able to see that the better life that they've created for their kids is one where they can challenge those notions of the past and be more free to explore their true selves. So that was something that was pretty important for me to put in the book. And it was important for me because, TJ's mom has this conversation with TJ later in the book that, without spoiling too much, shows why she was sort of pressuring TJ towards that because of her own experiences. So definitely something I was thinking about.
Wow, you said that so beautifully.
Yeah.
I just, wow. I'm really curious to know, like, what was the process of writing this particular book like for you? Did you face any major roadblocks? You've mentioned all of these perspectives you considered. Were there, like, people who supported you and you talked to about these things? Just, like, what was that whole process like?
Yeah, so there was definitely, like with writing any book, of course, there was challenges. I think the unique challenges to this book, probably the main one, was actually digging through my own trauma in order to even write this book, because I knew I wanted this book to really be no holds barred. I didn't want to beautify it at all. I didn't want to glaze over anything. I wanted to really get to the root, excuse my pun, of the issue. And that meant that I would have to get to the root of my own trauma. And that was something I had always avoided. And so I had to really become vulnerable in order to write this book. And that was really hard to do, like, just on an emotional level. It felt painful at times to think about my fears from especially high school, and how that used to manifest in me and how it still manifests in ways to this day. But once I was able to sort of, I guess, metaphorically crack that open, the writing of this book was just so, like, it was such a relief. It was so cathartic. I didn't go into this book thinking that it could change my own view of myself. I wrote it because I wanted to, be able to give it to people who are younger than me going through it. But it did end up changing my life as well. It changed my own viewpoint of my body, which is obviously very cool. Apart from that, there was definitely, you were asking about people that I had to sort of talk to about the book. I didn't talk to them like literally, but we had an excellent beta reader, Shenwei, who read this book from the authenticity angle, especially when it comes to the trans misogyny aspect, because that is not something that I've experienced as a cisgender woman. And there were definitely flaws in the book and things that I hadn't considered, viewpoints I hadn't considered. And so with their recommendations and their expertise, I was able to see things from a new viewpoint. And I think it made this book so much stronger because it wasn't even something that up until that point in the process, I had really consciously thought about, of how much trans misogyny is a huge part of body hair stigma. And it's like a huge key part. And I had been missing that because of my own perspective as a cisgender woman who hadn't thought about it. And so getting that feedback really made me dig into the book and add this extra layer that I think honestly, like, elevated the book so much. It was a small thing, but it was a huge thing. So that I feel very grateful that we were able to get that authenticity reader and to get that feedback. So those are some of the difficult things from the body hair angle, but just because you're asking about general challenges as well, I'll also throw in that the debate writing was very difficult. I think it was very challenging because some of these debate scenes are like very detailed, but I knew that could become very dry very fast. And I also wanted the debates to be relevant to the story, but also to the characters. And like the debates had to do so much work that I was tinkering with them and like changing huge parts of them right up until like line edits, which is like almost one of the last steps of the editing process. And so that also was like a lot of work to try to make sure that it hopefully came across as more entertaining and more relevant to the book.
Did you do debate in high school?
Regrettably, yes, I was a debate kid, but I wasn't like very good at it. I actually joined like the first year of high school. I didn't join the debate club. My brother was in it, and I watched his debates, but I was a little bit afraid of doing it because I wasn't very good at thinking on my feet. And then I said, screw it the next year. And I just decided to do it and face my fears because I wanted to get better at thinking on my feet. And so I joined, and honestly, it's one of the highlights of my high school experience was being in debate club, goofing off with the other members. So many of them in grades like higher and lower than me. They're now lifelong friends who I still talk to this day. And we just had like so many fun adventures together. And that was a huge reason, a huge inspiration for this book. Even before the body hair aspect, I knew I wanted to write a book about debate because it was so fun. And I thought it would make a fun high school novel to kind of detail the shenanigans and the friendships you make.
Oh, that's so lovely. And I love how like that aspect of things, like any experience that you've had in your life like never goes to waste because you can always channel it into your writing.
Exactly. Literally anything happens and I'm like, this can be in the book.
Exactly. And also thank you for highlighting that aspect of like trans misogyny and body hair, because I completely agree with you. And that was honestly one of the things that struck me the most as I read your book. And the reason I felt like I could recommend it to so many people was that was what I was referring to when I meant like you took an intersectional look at body hair. And I think it feels like you're right in that it is like a small but very big thing. And I was really curious as to like, you know, how you reflected that perspective so well, not yourself having that perspective. So, and it really shows the power of authenticity readers and of like having diverse perspectives read and give you feedback on your book. And I really wanted to take some time to like applaud you for putting that in there, because I know it was, you know, it was very significant to so many people. And I think often there's this trend where we just like forget about people who are affected by certain issues in like such different ways. And you really, you did that. And that's amazing. Or you didn't forget. Yeah, you didn't forget. Sorry, just to clarify. Yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, like there was a point up to which, you know, I think it was almost like it was like trying to find that one last piece of the puzzle, right? Where I just felt like there was something else to the story, and then it clicked once we had this authenticity reader. And then I started to sort of do more research on my own about it too, and trying to find other queer perspectives about body hair. And once I started to do that, it all just came together. I'm like, oh, yeah, of course, this is like a huge part of it that we just don't talk about. But yes,
I felt that as a reader. Yeah, I was like, as soon as that came in, I was like, yes, that was the missing piece.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I've definitely seen that a lot from readers, and I'm just so grateful that I was able to get those perspectives, because this book would not have hit the same, I think, for myself.
Well, I'm curious. You've mentioned like a number of different people that have been involved in your writing journey, like your parents and also your, you know, beta readers, authenticity readers. Do you have a community of other writers that support you? And what is your writing community like in general?
Yeah, so I think because I started out more in fan fiction, that I ended up getting some of my writing community from there. And so my beta readers, who I trust very much, are actually the same people who used to beta read my fan fiction back in the day, because I just trust like their perspective of my work so much, and they always know what I'm trying to do with my writing. So I trust them. And to this day, like I'll send them the like advanced reader copies of my books, and like they're a huge part of my life. I love them so much. I actually had the opportunity to meet one of them in person, because they're all internet friends. I met one of them in person last year after like an 8 or 9 year friendship. And it was so powerful and so amazing. And she was so lovely in person. Shout out to MJ. But in terms of like the trad pub community, I mean, my first book just came out. Well, it didn't just come out. It came out 3 years ago, but it was my first book. And I started to gain some more friends in the trad writing community as well. So, you know, people like Amna Qureshi, people like Adiba Jagadar, and the Desi Kidlit community, they used to put on like these Zooms, and we would be able to have these conversations with each other about whatever was going on in the publishing industry. So that's been really powerful for me. And every time I go to like a a writing festival or, a conference, which is not that often. I wish I could go to more, and I hope to. But every time I do, I'm just struck by how seen I feel. And I'm always reminded I need to do more of this, because so often writing is a very isolating process. And I've never lived in like really, really big cities with huge writing communities. But I just like every time I go and I sit down with other writers and we talk about the publishing industry and vent about things, I'm just reminded of how important it is to have community. So I would say my community is relatively small at this time, but I hope to continue growing it as I publish more books.
You mentioned you don't do writing full time. How do you balance that with being a successful author?
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for saying I'm successful. It never feels that way. It never does. But I acknowledge that definitely there have been successes. But I work in healthcare, which is obviously like totally different. But I think for me, I actually enjoy the fact that I'm not a full-time writer. Particularly, I've come to appreciate this in the last couple of years when I've run into roadblocks with the publishing industry and with gatekeepers. Especially because, when you're a full-time writer, you are basically writing for your dinner. Like you do have to make some compromises in terms of your artistic freedoms at times and in terms of what you're willing to write. And I applaud people who do that. I think that's amazing. I don't know if I could do that. Even with my second book coming out, as you may have noticed, is coming out with a different publisher. And that's because I was with my first publisher. I love my first publisher. They did such great things for TJ Powar. I love my editor. Shout out to Kel. The way I wanted to write it obviously made it a slightly different genre than my first book. And initially I was asked about whether I could make this a little bit more sort of contemporary. And I understand 100%, like it's a business model, right? You want to build an author brand. But as a writer, I'm a very chaotic person. And I didn't want to change the key parts of my story to fit that sort of mold. So what I'm trying to say is I appreciate the fact that I'm not writing for my dinner. And I think if I was writing for my dinner, I might lose a lot of the spark I have for it. I think there's a way to keep that spark. Adiba Jagadar, who's a full-time writer, she always tells me, I have some projects which are less like passion projects and just kind of writing them, having fun doing them, but there's no like personal passion pressure to them. And then I have my passion projects, and that's kind of how she does it. I'm not sure I'm at that point. So I actually like the fact that I don't full-time write. It feels still like something that's a passion for me. The spark is always there. I'm always excited to write. And I appreciate the balance too, because whenever things are like happening, like, if there's drama happening in the writing community or drama happening in my like work life, I can kind of take a step back and be like, it's not that deep. Like I can always go back to like the other thing that's like not giving me as much like grief. And so I really appreciate the ability to step back and see things from like a bird's eye view, which I think if I was like a full-time writer and then like was being constantly bombarded by like imprint shutdowns and like negative publishing news, I'd probably lose it. Whereas now it's like, oh, like LOL, I guess that's happening. Anyway, gonna keep writing. So I think it's actually a positive thing for me, at least at this point in my career. Not saying I would never do like full-time or anything like that, but at this point, I'm actually cool with it.
That totally makes sense, especially the thing you said about like drama happening in both circles and being able to take a step back. I am curious. It sounds like you have a full-time job in healthcare. Mm-hmm. So how do you just balance that with writing so much?
Yeah. I mean, like it's hard, like it is. And often I wouldn't even say it's a balance. I think it's more of like a wild swinging from one thing to the next. But it's like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like a sine wave. This is like my STEM part coming out. But like a sine wave, like the average of a sine wave is 0, right? Like it's balanced. But at any given time, it's almost never at 0. It's always wildly swinging from one to the other. And so that's kind of how I see my life. Like there are times that I'm really into writing and times that I'm really not. But if I look back at like a 1-year period, like I can see that I was able to at different times focus on my writing and different times I focus on other things. And I think that's kind of how I do it. I think it was Nora Roberts who made this comparison of like she's always juggling like different like balls, and some of them are plastic and some of them are glass. And in order to get things done, sometimes you acknowledge that you have to drop some. But the only difference is you just think about which ones are plastic, because those are the ones that you can drop. The glass ones you can't, right? So that's my mindset as well. What can I drop that won't be a catastrophe, so that I can focus on certain things. Yeah.
Also mentioned that Reasons We Break is very different from TJ Powar. I'm curious about how it is and what your writing, like how your writing process is different from TJ Powar for Reasons We Break.
Yeah. So there are a lot of similarities, first of all. Like it is contemporary. It's got the coming of age themes. It's got some funny, lighthearted moments, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a little bit different genre-wise because it kind of goes a little bit into thriller territory a bit. When I initially started writing it, my thought was, I'm aiming to write the contemporary. I was aiming to write something similar to TJ Powar, at least even just in terms of like the genre. But when I started writing both the characters of Simran and Rajan, it just started to feel like I wasn't utilizing them enough, that there was more to them under the surface than that kind of story could allow for. And so I started to dig more into, why is Rajan, who like in TJ Powar is like the class stoner, but he's like kind of funny and also he is a little bit serious at times. Like he forces TJ to see the social hierarchy in a slightly different way and see her own cousin in a different way. And that sort of intrigued me. And I wanted to kind of figure out like why he is the way that he is. And that sort of brought me into this idea of the Indo-Canadian gang culture and how gangs target vulnerable teens. And I knew I wanted him to be part of that. But once that became part of the story, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll write like a gang backdrop romance then. But then I started thinking about Simran, and she's somebody who, again, on the surface seems to be like a very, good girl, gets good grades, like, tidy, organized person, but she's also like, she's got this hint of messiness under the surface that really intrigued me. And I felt like I could do a lot more with her if she was part of that storyline, the gang storyline as well. And so that's how it started to sort of migrate a little bit more into thriller territory. And it was a unique writing process for me in that with TJ Powar, I knew from the start that it was going to be like a lighthearted, contemporary, like rom-com-ish kind of book. And that at least never changed throughout writing of the story. I had a fairly clear picture of what it would be. But with Reasons We Break, it transformed throughout the process of writing. So from my like very brief outline from the start to the end of the first draft, like it had totally drastically changed, not drastically, but like it had changed quite significantly in terms of genre. And it continued to transform until I think like the second draft. And then I started to know like what this book was. So it really took a lot of trial and error to figure out what it was going to be. But once I figured it out, I just wanted to follow it. Like I knew it was a little bit out there. I knew I'd have to tell people like, just trust me, just like follow me here, please. Because I do think that this version of the book is the strongest story for these two that I could have written, but it is a little bit different. And I had to be a little bit bold to do that. So I hope people who enjoy TJ Powar will still come over to this book because it's got a lot of the same things. It's got some of the same characters, including some cameos from other people in the first book. And
oh my gosh.
Issues. Yeah. And it touches on social issues. It's got romance and heavier romance, I would say, than TJ Powar. So, and of course, like the characters, if you enjoyed that kind of thing, I think you'll find a lot of the same in Reasons We Break. But there's something new as well for people who are returning to my work and people who are just discovering it.
Well, I trust you, so I am excited for the book. I was already excited, but also I'd known beforehand that it was going to have like thriller aspect because I'd read the synopsis. And I love thriller, so combined, I'm even more excited. So
I'm usually a little hesitant about thriller, but you've sold it to me. I'm definitely going to be checking it out. I mean, I knew I was going to before we got on here, but just hearing you talk about it, you can like see how passionate you are about it and all the different like changes you've made and like diversions in genre, and it connects back to what you were saying earlier about how just like being able to like really do what you're passionate about, and you can like really see that in what you're saying.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I think it was the writing of this book, the experience writing this book that made me realize that like it made me like reevaluate my priorities about writing. And reminded me of why I love to write in the first place. So I really credit this book for bringing me back to that.
Aw. We are almost running out of time, so I wanted to ask you this question that we close all of our guests with, and that is, what to someone who sees themselves in the characters that you have written?
Yeah, so I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, where I talked about how powerful it is to see yourself reflected on screen, see yourself reflected in the pages of a book. And because I know how powerful that is, I find it very touching when people tell me that they found some part of themselves in something I wrote. So I think number one, I would say is I'm just very touched. Like it really means a lot to me. And I think it means a lot to any writer. So if you ever feel like, you felt yourself reflected in the pages of a book, you should always tell that writer, because I can guarantee they would love to hear it. A lot of writing, as you guys know, is such like an isolated process. You're on your own, you're working on something. But part of what makes writing so fun, I think, is knowing that you're going to share it with people. And then the stories, they're not just, your own personal ideas. It also becomes a dialogue. It becomes a conversation starter. And I think that's one of the most powerful uses of storytelling. I've had people tell me that, I always subconsciously knew like this about body hair, but until I read it in a story format, until I read it like through the eyes of a character, it didn't hit quite as deeply. And I think that really just speaks to the power of fiction that I think some people tend to underestimate a little bit. So I really appreciate it, is what I'm trying to say. And I understand it completely. And it really warms my heart to see how many people have related to the book, because that was ultimately the only thing I wanted to do with this book. And it's happened so many times over. I feel like I totally succeeded with what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And that's what makes a successful author, which you are. So.
It's true. It's just like, I don't know, publishing is always like a flop fest. Like it's like 99% L's and then like one W once in a while. So like it makes you feel always, any writer can, like even the ones who are New York Times bestsellers, everyone like feels like a flop, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But it is nice to like hear from other people and realize like, hey, I'm actually not a flop. So thank you.
No, of course. And I'm surprised we haven't mentioned this so far, but you mentioned something earlier about it, like starting conversations. And so Anvita and I have been friends for a while. We've like had so many conversations, and it wasn't until we both read your book that we both ended up having a really long conversation about our own experiences with body hair. And it's the first time I've ever done that with a South Asian girl. And I ended up having a conversation with my mom about it afterwards. And we also hadn't directly talked about it. And it even like influenced me to write about it in my own writing. And I write a lot about like body stuff more from like the lens of like illness and disability, but like it also came up there. And yeah, just wanted you to know that like it really is that conversation starter, and is, that's so significant to so many people who are reading your work.
That means so much to me. And I feel like too, like it's not only just for us, for South Asians, but I've also had so many readers who aren't South Asian come to me and say, I didn't even know that women can grow this kind of hair. And I feel like that's also very important, because otherwise the world erases us. And unless people see our representation in stories, they won't know that we exist. And that's another big reason why it's so important. It's not just for us, it's for every community to be able to see each other and acknowledge each other.
Yeah. And I think you show that even within your story. Like you have the white characters in the story. And like, for example, the love interest, oh my gosh, the scene where like she like is waxing his legs. Oh my gosh, like top 10 scenes. But it's just like, that's so real. It's like other people need to learn about it too, because then they also learn about how imposing those beauty standards and having those thoughts about beauty standards, whether you're like a cis guy or, whoever, it's just like, it's so important for everyone, like you said, not just us South Asian girls to feel seen, but for everyone else to kind of see what those sorts of thought processes are doing.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for being here. It is genuinely been such an honor to talk to you. And
thank you for having me.
We're both so excited to read your next book. And just thank you for being here.
And before we close, I just want to give a quick shout out. TJ Power is out now, so make sure to go grab your copy. And Reasons We Break comes out on November 4th of this year and is also available for pre-order. Make sure to find Jesmeen on Twitter, Instagram, or through her newsletter, all of which you can find on her website, jdeowrites.com. We'll put the links in our description below, so make sure to check her out.
Thank you so much, Jesmeen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was such a good conversation. You guys are amazing.